Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched. I'm your host, the Social Solipsist, and this week I watched Everything Everywhere All at Once from 2022. Well, I don't want to lead in too heavy and say this one's going to be short, because then it inevitably won't be. You already know before I do, technically. But this is going to be a difficult one to talk about for a whole variety of reasons. Not the least of which is that it's extremely good, and I want everyone to watch it. And I don't want to talk about anything and spoil the experience of it revealing itself for the first time. As usual, the trailers and advertisements and things that I mostly have tried to avoid, but you live in public space and are bombarded by everything. The trailers and everything are they're doing this film a disservice. Not because the trailers are deceptive, but because they lose, well, it's a trailer. It loses the nuance of the movie no matter how good it is. And this film has so much to offer that there is no way to possibly encapsulate all that it has. I will say that okay. I need to back up a second and talk about this film and its apparent presentation, which is that it looks kind of like a superhero movie. And part of the reason why I watched it is because I am burnt out on the MCU. I have the MCU looming over my head. The last movie I watched out of the MCU was why can't I remember that? Black Widow. And it was really bad. And at the end of Endgame, I was sort of already pretty burnt out on the MCU. And I don't want to make this video about the MCU, but there's like 4 or 5 movies right now in the MCU that are looming over my head, and I do kind of want to watch, but also sort of resent the presence of. And so I was looking for something that was sort of in the vein, but not. I wanted something that wasn't this, hyper-produced, Hollywoodized action film. And I don't remember where I first heard about Everything Everywhere All at Once, but it didn't get a particularly wide release, and by all accounts, it wasn't particularly successful at the box office. Allegedly about 92 million on a 25 million budget. But it has gotten a lot of buzz for being extremely good. And I'm always kind of interested in general in what A24 is producing and releasing, because A24 tends to have, if not always good things, at least things that are experimental and interesting. And so it definitely sort of hooked me in that sense. In addition to all that, the casting of Michelle Yeoh as a older female actress who is also Asian American or not white, basically, in a leading role of a movie of any size, especially one that is intending to appeal, at least in some respects, to an action movie audience, is great. Because Michelle Yeoh is pretty much universally great in everything I've ever seen her in. And especially to see that her career is continuing and that the industry is happy to, well, some part of the industry is still happy to cast someone like her, is awesome. And so at the very least, I was just hopeful that we'd have an action film with some playful stuff in it and some competent editing. And it is so much more than that. First and foremost, yes, the action is great. Like, it is such an interesting blend of sort of the 90s and 2000s specific flavor of Hong Kong action cinema, the introduction of obviously, like, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon was a big landmark film when it came over and got a very wide release, and that sort of had a lot of influence on Hollywood action, but not often in good or competently executed ways. And so to see a re-evolution of martial arts cinema being really well mixed with some of the stylings, both the stylings of current action, Hollywood action, while still being better directed, better choreographed, better edited, all these other things, was such a breath of fresh air. In addition to let me not diverge too much on this. The action is all phenomenal. All of it is choreographed, shot, performed excellently. It's all incredibly satisfying. It gives me the giggles. It is so much fun. It is so well executed. It is by a wide margin better than basically anything I've seen in at least a few years. And it's not perfect, but it's really, really good and really satisfying. It avoids a lot of the typical pitfalls I complain about in Hollywood action, and it's just excellent all around. And if that's all this movie had going for it, it would still have greatly not only met but greatly exceeded my hopes for a superhero-ish sort of, high action film to take me away from the horrors of the MCU. But the action is not even the strongest point of this film. And it is really strong, but the action is mostly there for flavor. The actual content of the film is so much stronger and so much more dynamic and so much more thoughtful and caring and interesting and funny than anything in the MCU, or largely in a lot of other things as well. And it just makes me thoroughly love this film. This is not just a casting of Michelle Yeoh as a lead older female Asian, which would be great on its own. It's weird that I have to say that in current year, but Jesus, can we get some variety in casting these days? But the whole of the film is largely about an Asian American immigrant family, and that is not something that's seen all that commonly in TV or cinema right now. And there's tons of aspects that speak really powerfully to the immigrant experience and the experience of multiple generations of immigrant families, and the experiences that in how those generations can feel about each other. And the I don't want to delve too deeply into the themes because I'm afraid of spoiling anything. But the the movie is about a family and the experiences of that family and the individuals and how they relate to each other and how they feel about each other and how the experiences they've had over decades have influenced their feelings and their beliefs, personal and external, and the way they interface with each other. And while the spectacle and the actual plot of the film are really not about that directly at all, it's not a meta commentary, or it's not like subtle under the surface either, that ultimately the all of the story elements are building on this understanding of familial relationships. It talks, I can't possibly explain, even if I wanted to spoil everything and just talk about this for hours, it wouldn't be possible for me to properly articulate all of the elements that this addresses. Economics, relationships, the immigrant experience, cultural differences, pop culture experience, like the interface between parents and children, is like all these different things that are so good, and each one of them individually is better at doing that thing than like most other movies about that one thing, except it's doing like 20 of them at once. And it's incredibly powerful, and it's still well paced and funny and written well and just smart. And it doesn't manipulate you at any point. It's not trying to trick you into feeling certain ways. It's not trying to trick you into believing that this plot works or something like that. It's just, it's this mishmash of all these different ideas and experiences all together, and they all synergize in a way I can't possibly encapsulate just in words. And that really gets to the issue of trying to assign a genre to it, because in many ways it's just this mess of well, I don't want to say mess. I mean mess in a positive way, of all these different genres, all these different themes. And I initially, as I often do with watching films, start to draw connections to other films. Okay, what are these references? Like, either does it have direct references or homages, or is it just like sort of the influence of this film on culture and how that's rubbed off on future filmmakers? But if I wanted to, the list was dramatically growing at a speed that was unprecedented. Not in like this has a ton of references kind of thing, but just I could compare this film to 20 different films, and all of them would be pertinent comparisons. And ultimately, what I would all be saying about almost all of them is that this is a better evolution of pretty much every single one of them individually, and yet again mashes them all together. There's a lot. I've already talked a little bit about how funny and well written this film is. It is funny through and through, and it is not, for want of a better phrase, it's not doing the Joss Whedon humor. And I know that is, I can't even pretend I completely hate the Joss Whedon style of humor, but it has become so pervasive, especially in the MCU, where it has been used with wild abandon to undercut scenes and ruin stuff that's already kind of struggling to stand on its own 2 feet. that to have a witty, well-written exchange of dialogue between characters that makes you chuckle, but also and has some of that like bantery aspect to it, without sabotaging the tone, is such a breath of fresh air, and I'm so pleased with it. This is written and directed by a writer and director duo. I think they both do both. They just refer to themselves as Daniels, because it's Daniel Kwan and Daniel Scheinert. I might be getting the pronunciation wrong, but they are great. At like this script is just excellent, and in addition to that, the direction is really incredible as well. Interestingly, the Russo brothers are listed as producers on this film. I don't know what level of influence they actually had on this, and I could certainly see them being producers in the Daniels are still relatively new to the industry, and so I could see them having asked the Russos to be producers for the sake of like, hey, can we get your take on how you've worked with these visual elements before, particularly in the MCU, and then once we learn how to do that, we do our own thing with it. And I see a ton of that where there are visual cues that feel like they would fit in the MCU, except for they're executed so much better and with twists that are really clever, that it's just dramatically improved. So I am extraordinarily happy with the script, with the writers and directors, and how it all came together. Visually, it is a stunning film through and through. There are certainly plenty of aspects of it that are deliberately kind of grimy and ugly and these sorts of things, but there are tons of really subtle, smart framing and filming choices. Even the first 30 seconds of the film had me like giggling with how much fun they just had in this like one sequence of shots of just like, oh, that's so much fun. What you didn't have to do that. You could have had a much more like basic establishing shot, and it would have been totally fine, and possibly, even because the framing's still good, still really nice. But you went the extra mile and you have these clever things going on, and it's just great. And so I'm very happy with the visuals through and through. It uses a variety of different styles as well. Visual styles, both in terms of cameras that are being used, the lighting that's being used, the sort of I mean, it all synergizes really well because you have these disparate elements of the film that are supposed to look very, very different, and they make excellent use of the lighting and the costuming and the sets and their camera and lens choice, in order to get a very specific visual feeling on the screen. And I'm crazy impressed by that, even for guys that are, not novices, but still relatively new. Just some great cinematography in here, and no stunt cinematography. Like, when I say stunt cinematography, they're not doing the, oh, I'm doing this because I can, kind of like, oh, look at what I can do with this camera. It's very deliberate and clear in its artistry, and I'm just super happy with it. God, I have so much more to talk about. In addition to being just a great script and smart and funny and all these characters that are all great on their own, it's also deeply moving to me, or at least it was to me. There's lots of themes that really got in my chest, and I cried as much as I laughed in this film. Honestly, there's some aspects of this film that I probably didn't see super clearly because there was some real crying going on. Not an insignificant amount of it. And it's not all just like, oh, that's sad. It's like there's just really powerful moments that are sort of emotionally overwhelming. There's even stuff that's just like very funny, but because of the emotional, the other emotions that are synthesized into that humor, I still ended up like, I'm like, cry laughing at certain points. And to sort of cap that whole thought off, that is due in no small part to all of the actors. Michelle Yeoh is incredible, but there's every actor in here is great. The casting is impeccable. It's interesting for me to find out after the fact that apparently in the original writing of the script, they were going to have the main character be male, and they were going to cast Jackie Chan as the main character, and Awkwafina as the daughter. And while those probably both would have worked, I think the actors that they cast instead, Michelle Yeoh and is it I don't know the daughter's name, but she's great too. All of the minor characters are great. Of particular weird note, I thought I recognized the guy, but in retrospect, I don't think I did. The father is played by, I'm going to butcher this name, I apologize. Ke Huy Quan, who possibly might be most well known for playing Short Round in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, a character who, yeah, rough. And he's had a few roles in a few different films over the years, but has not been really a very active actor. But he's incredible in this film. Apparently he also has done some like stunt choreography work and things, but like he's fantastic. And I can't talk about a bunch of stuff without spoiling aspects of the film. All of the actors are great. They play a variety of different aspects of their characters in really strong ways. That how do I talk about this? They are not one, the characters are not one note at all. In addition to being written really well and having depth of their own, even the most minor of characters having some pretty good depth, they are tasked with a variety of different, like the cast list is relatively short, and so they are tasked with doing a lot of heavy lifting even as minor characters, and all of them perform excellently. I'm just super thrilled with all of the casting. One more thing. Well, okay. So I talked about the cinematography. The editing is also impeccable. That's just as important as the cinematography and the direction. And in terms of the editing, while the visual editing is really, really good, so is the audio editing. The soundtrack for the film is incredible. It is made by a group that I'm not familiar with called Sun Lux. And apparently they took like 2 to 3 years to make the soundtrack, and it was worth it. I mean, well, they were doing it during the pandemic, so I think it was probably some of the time was due to that. But not only is the soundtrack like incredible through and through, and knows exactly when it needs to be where it needs to be. All of the audio editing is equally important and equally incredible. And the sound effects work and the audio editing and mixing is so important towards keeping what at sometimes can be very chaotic visuals legible with like ancillary elements. I've talked before about how film is this synthesis of different arts, right? The writing, the performance, the visual composition, and the audio composition. And this film is a very, very strong representation of what can happen when you have something that is able to be so much better because those things work in harmony. I think with worse audio editing, and it's not something I've thought that much about before, but is definitely a problem in a lot of other films, the chaotic action of an action scene or just a visually busy picture can be either elevated or muddied by the audio that's there. It has me now thinking back to some of the action scenes like in the MCU that I particularly don't like, and how in addition to being visually muddy, the audio also creates misunderstandings about the visuals, and where your brain's trying to connect the audio and the visual and they don't match, and so it's in an attempt to try and trick you into certain things, and it just becomes muddy as a result. Whereas this, where if you watched it with no audio, would be very good but kind of chaotic, is elevated by the ability of audio to clarify what is being seen, and to give you audio cues for things that are coming and things that are that characters are reacting to that may not even be in frame. So audio is without a doubt a very, very strong element. This video is not short. Fuck. I'm going to avoid talking about this for too much longer because I just want to say how much I enjoy it. With the exception of like one joke that I was like, really? Are we really doing that? It is just kind of incredible in every respect. And frankly, if it hadn't taken so much out of me emotionally, like if it wasn't, it's not a hard watch, but it's it's so engaging. It's kind of, it's a little exhausting. I might watch it again today, if not for that, because it's that good, and I think there's that much more to be absorbed. I don't think it's the kind of thing that's it's not like crazy complex. It doesn't try and confuse you. It's not the kind of thing where you have to watch it 5 times just to get it. But I definitely feel like it's the kind of thing where, given 5 watchings, you will get something more out of it each time and appreciate what they're doing that much more. And I am sure that I will be showing this to people and watching it again on my own. I am thoroughly, thoroughly pleased with it. Of course, that means that it will not get the awards that it deserves, but this is one of the most spectacular films I've seen in an extremely long time. And I know I've said that in a little less strong terms before on this channel. And obviously not everything is apples to apples comparisons. But it is, it's just great. It just is. That's really all I can say. It deserves more recognition, and it makes me happy. Thank you guys for watching another episode of Solipsist Watched. I've been the Social Solipsist. Watch this movie. I'll see you guys next time.